Comfort Zone Paradox. The comfort zone paradox is the puzzling, often counterintuitive reality that the more we seek comfort and safety, the less comfortable and fulfilled we ultimately become. At its core, it reveals a hidden trap in human psychology. The instinct to avoid discomfort, uncertainty, and risk may offer temporary relief, but over time, it stunts growth, limits potential, and often leads to a quiet dissatisfaction with life. The comfort zone is a psychological space where one feels safe, familiar, and in control. It's where routines go unchallenged, where expectations are predictable, and where failure feels distant. In this space, anxiety is low, and the sense of control is high. Naturally, we are drawn to this zone. It feels like home. But the paradox emerges when we stay there too long. Avoiding challenges may seem to protect us from stress, failure, or embarrassment, but this avoidance often breeds stagnation. When we shield ourselves from the unknown, we also block access to meaningful change, new experiences, and the kind of personal growth that can only come through friction. Growth, by its nature, requires struggle. Muscles grow by being torn and repaired. Minds grow by being stretched. Relationships deepen through vulnerability. All of these processes live outside the walls of comfort. Even more paradoxical is that long-term comfort often leads to discomfort. A person who avoids public speaking might feel safer today, but over time they may grow anxious about missed opportunities, regret the loss of confidence, or feel increasingly trapped by fear. The very thing they avoided, the anxiety of speaking, has expanded and taken root in their life, subtly dominating their sense of agency. What once was a comfortable choice becomes a source of chronic discomfort. Conversely, those who deliberately leave their comfort zone, even briefly, often find that it expands. By voluntarily facing discomfort, we become more adaptable, resilient, and courageous. Each uncomfortable step becomes a small victory, and over time, what once terrified us begins to feel natural. Here lies the deeper irony of the paradox. Enduring short-term discomfort often leads to long-term comfort, confidence, and freedom. The comfort zone paradox challenges us to rethink how we define safety and success. True security is not found in hiding from life's difficulties, but in developing the strength to meet them. In avoiding discomfort, we may preserve our sense of control, but we also sacrifice the richness and depth of fully lived experience. Growth and joy lie on the other side of fear, not in its avoidance. So, the paradox remains: comfort is only truly gained by embracing the uncomfortable. The more we resist this truth, the more trapped we become by our need for ease. But those who learn to dance with discomfort unlock a far greater and more lasting sense of comfort, the kind that comes not from avoiding life, but from learning how to live it fully. Social Media Paradox. The social media paradox is a modern riddle of connection and isolation, of expression and concealment. It unfolds in the tension between the promise of social media, to bring people closer, to foster understanding, to build community, and its frequent outcome, disconnection, comparison, and loneliness. Never before have so many people been so easily reachable, and yet never before have so many reported feeling so alone. The very tools designed to shrink distances between us often magnify the emotional gaps we feel in our everyday lives. On the surface, social media offers intimacy. A photo, a message, a story, shared instantly with friends, family, or strangers across the world. It allows us to craft and share our lives, to witness others, to be seen. But this visibility is curated. Posts are polished, moments are edited, and imperfections are carefully left outside the frame. Over time, what we see is not people, but projections, versions of reality shaped by subtle pressures to appear happy, successful, and always in control. The paradox arises here: we connect more, but know each other less. We see more, but understand less. As we scroll through highlight reels of others' lives, we compare them to our unfiltered experience and often come up short. The more we try to stay connected, the more disconnected we may feel. There is a strange illusion of presence: hundreds of friends, constant updates, likes, and reactions, yet the experience can feel hollow, as though the substance of true human connection has been replaced with tokens. The paradox deepens when we find ourselves both craving attention and resenting it, both wanting to share and fearing the vulnerability it demands. We build personas to protect ourselves, but these very personas can become barriers to the deep connection we actually seek. Social media also promises empowerment, a voice for the voiceless, platforms for advocacy and expression. And it delivers, to an extent. But it also creates an environment where value is measured in metrics: likes, followers, engagement. What was meant to be self-expression can quickly become performance, where the need for validation begins to drive behavior. We may speak louder, but not more authentically. We may listen more, but not more deeply. The tools of communication become tools of surveillance and self-comparison. And yet, we keep returning. The paradox doesn't lie in social media being wholly good or bad, it lies in its capacity to be both at once. It offers the warmth of connection and the chill of alienation in the same gesture. It gives us the illusion of control over our image, while subtly shaping our behavior in ways we barely notice. It gives voice to the many, yet often rewards the loudest or most curated. It is a mirror, but a distorted one. Living with this paradox means acknowledging its pull and its cost. It means recognizing that while social media can be a tool for genuine connection, it cannot replace the slower, messier, more vulnerable forms of intimacy that define real relationships. It means being aware that in our efforts to be seen, we might be hiding more than we reveal. The social media paradox is not a trap, but a reflection, one that invites us to ask not just how we connect, but why, and at what cost. Independence Paradox. The independence paradox speaks to the deep and often unspoken tension between the desire to be self-sufficient and the reality of our need for others. It reflects the human yearning for freedom, autonomy, and self-mastery, paired with an equally strong, though sometimes hidden, longing for connection, support, and belonging. It arises when, in the pursuit of independence, we begin to isolate ourselves, when, in striving not to need anyone, we quietly deny a part of our nature that is fundamentally relational. Modern culture often celebrates independence as a mark of strength. The ideal of the self-made person, the one who stands alone, who needs no help, who charts their own course, is held up as a kind of hero. We are taught to value autonomy, to take pride in handling things on our own, to associate dependence with weakness or immaturity. And yet, as we build walls to protect our independence, we may find that the very isolation we achieve begins to feel like a kind of prison. What once felt like freedom can start to resemble loneliness. This is the paradox: true independence cannot exist without some form of interdependence. No one learns, grows, or thrives in a vacuum. We are shaped by our relationships, nurtured by communities, and enriched by the ways others reflect our experiences back to us. Even the most inward-looking paths, creativity, self-discovery, healing, are often sparked or deepened by interactions with others. The more we deny this, the more brittle our independence becomes. It turns into a posture rather than a reality, defensive, self-protective, and exhausting to maintain. Conversely, those who allow themselves to depend on others, who accept vulnerability and connection, often become more resilient and grounded. They are not less independent, but more so, because their strength is not built on isolation, it is reinforced by trust, by love, by shared experience. Paradoxically, it is through meaningful connection that we develop the confidence and inner stability to stand on our own. In letting ourselves be held, we learn how to hold ourselves. This paradox also reveals itself in relationships, the fear of losing oneself in closeness, the instinct to pull away in order to preserve one's identity. But again, it is not separation that protects the self, it is clarity, communication, and trust. The person who clings to autonomy at all costs may miss out on the richness that comes from allowing another person into their life in a real and unguarded way. And yet, those who fuse too closely with others may lose sight of their own voice. Independence and connection, then, are not opposites but partners in a deeper kind of wholeness. The independence paradox doesn't ask us to choose between strength and vulnerability, between standing alone and standing with others. It asks us to hold both truths, that we are individuals with agency and uniqueness, and that we are also part of a larger web of mutual reliance. It calls for a redefinition of independence, not as isolation, but as the ability to know who we are while remaining open to others. Not as refusing help, but as knowing when to ask for it. Not as denying our needs, but as owning them without shame. In this light, independence is not about distancing ourselves from others, but about cultivating the inner resources to engage with others freely and authentically. The paradox teaches that the strongest people are not those who need nothing, but those who have learned how to need wisely, without fear, without apology, and without losing themselves in the process. The productivity paradox. The productivity paradox refers to the counterintuitive situation where increases in productivity, whether through technological advancements, efficiency strategies, or workplace optimizations, do not always lead to proportional gains in output, economic growth, or well-being. Instead, these improvements can sometimes result in stagnation, overload, or even decline in overall effectiveness and satisfaction. Historically, the term emerged prominently during the 1980s and 1990s when economist Robert Solow famously remarked, "You can see the computer age everywhere but in the productivity statistics." Despite major investments in information technology, companies and economies were not experiencing the expected leaps in productivity. This contradiction puzzled researchers. Why wasn't innovation automatically translating into measurable gains? One explanation is that technology creates as many complexities as it solves. New tools often require learning curves, cultural adaptation, and structural changes within organizations. Email and smartphones, for example, have made communication instant and ubiquitous, but also overwhelming and constant. People spend more time managing notifications, switching tasks, or responding to non-urgent messages, reducing their ability to engage in deep, focused work. Thus, even as tasks become technically easier, cognitive overload reduces the quality and efficiency of human effort. Another layer of the paradox involves diminishing returns. After a certain point, squeezing more productivity out of a person or system leads to burnout, stress, and reduced creativity. When individuals are pressured to be constantly on, they may appear busy without being truly effective. The more tightly time is managed, the more fragmented it becomes, leaving little room for reflection, innovation, or rest, all of which are necessary for meaningful progress. Moreover, short-term efficiency often comes at the cost of long-term resilience. In efforts to streamline, organizations may cut redundancy, eliminate slack, or automate processes. While this boosts immediate output, it can also make systems fragile and unable to adapt to disruptions. When something unexpected happens, like a supply chain issue or a crisis, those stripped-down systems often fail more catastrophically than less efficient ones. The paradox also applies at the personal level. People adopt productivity tools, time-saving hacks, or rigid schedules in pursuit of a more optimized life, only to find themselves busier, more anxious, and less fulfilled. Productivity becomes an end in itself rather than a means to a richer, more balanced life. Ironically, in the race to do more, we can lose sight of why we're doing anything at all. In essence, the productivity paradox reveals that more output does not automatically mean more value, and greater efficiency does not always lead to better outcomes. True productivity must be understood not only in terms of speed or volume, but also in terms of sustainability, purpose, and impact. Without a deeper awareness of these factors, efforts to increase productivity can paradoxically undermine the very goals they aim to achieve. Luxury Paradox. The luxury paradox is the striking contradiction that the more we surround ourselves with luxury, comfort, abundance, and high-end experiences, the less satisfied, appreciative, and fulfilled we may ultimately feel. While luxury promises happiness, ease, and elevated status, too much of it can lead to a dulling of the senses, a shrinking of gratitude, and even a subtle form of spiritual emptiness. Paradoxically, the pursuit of more can leave us feeling less. Luxury, in its original form, is meant to enhance life, to bring beauty, pleasure, or relief from hardship. A soft bed after a long day, a delicious meal, a beautiful home, or a rare experience can bring joy and deepen our appreciation for the richness of life. But when luxury becomes the norm rather than the exception, something begins to shift. What once felt like a treat becomes an expectation. Gratitude fades. The senses numb. And slowly, luxury loses its magic. This is the heart of the paradox. What was once extraordinary becomes ordinary when it is constantly available. As we adapt to higher levels of comfort or indulgence, our baseline expectations rise. What once delighted us now barely registers. This psychological phenomenon, called hedonic adaptation, ensures that even the most lavish lifestyles can feel routine and empty over time. The more we consume, the more it takes to feel the same spark. Eventually, we chase ever greater luxuries not for joy, but to escape boredom or a sense of inner lack. Moreover, the luxury paradox extends beyond material goods. A life of effortless ease can quietly erode our resilience and meaning. Challenge, struggle, and discomfort, though unpleasant, are often what give life texture and depth. When everything comes easily, we may lose touch with the satisfaction that comes from effort, and the joy that follows overcoming obstacles. We begin to fear discomfort instead of learning from it. The cocoon of luxury can become a velvet cage. Socially, the pursuit of luxury can also create disconnection. It can lead to comparison, envy, or a fixation on status. The more we define ourselves by what we own or display, the more fragile our sense of self becomes, tied to things that can be lost or surpassed. In chasing exclusivity, we may unintentionally isolate ourselves from authenticity, simplicity, or shared human experience. Yet the paradox is not a condemnation of luxury itself. Beauty, comfort, and refinement have their place. But the key lies in balance, contrast, and awareness. Luxury has the most impact when it is occasional, when it punctuates a life that also knows simplicity and effort. The rare sip of fine wine is richer when not consumed daily. A beautiful hotel feels magical when it's a break from routine, not the new standard. When we reintroduce contrast into our lives, between comfort and discomfort, abundance and simplicity, luxury regains its meaning. The luxury paradox ultimately invites us to rethink what we truly need to feel alive. It asks us to consider that the richest lives are not necessarily those filled with the most things, but those lived with presence, purpose, and gratitude. True wealth may lie not in the abundance of possessions, but in the ability to enjoy small pleasures deeply and to find meaning in things that can't be bought. In this way, the paradox becomes a guide: enjoy luxury, but do not depend on it. Seek comfort, but do not fear its absence. And remember that life's deepest luxuries, love, time, peace, meaning, are often the simplest and most easily overlooked. Innovation Paradox. The innovation paradox is the curious and often frustrating reality that while innovation promises progress, growth, and transformation, it frequently faces resistance from the very systems and people that stand to benefit from it. It is the contradiction between the desire for change and the fear of its consequences. As much as societies, organizations, and individuals celebrate creativity and forward thinking, they often cling, consciously or unconsciously, to the familiar patterns that innovation threatens to disrupt. At its core, innovation is about breaking with tradition. It involves challenging assumptions, rethinking what is possible, and embracing risk. But most human systems, whether in business, education, government, or culture, are designed for stability, predictability, and control. These systems tend to reward what works, not what is new. As a result, truly novel ideas are often dismissed as impractical, dangerous, or unrealistic, even as people express a surface-level enthusiasm for innovation. The paradox emerges here: we ask for new solutions but prefer the safety of old problems. This resistance isn't always malicious. It's often rooted in the very real discomfort that change brings. Innovation creates uncertainty. It disrupts roles, rewrites rules, and renders expertise temporarily obsolete. For leaders, it can mean relinquishing control. For workers, it can mean relearning or requalifying. For consumers, it can mean adapting to new technologies or paradigms they did not ask for. Even when an innovation clearly improves life in the long term, its short-term disruption can provoke anxiety and pushback. The paradox deepens when innovation succeeds. Once a new idea is accepted and proves valuable, it too becomes part of the established system, something to be protected rather than questioned. What was once radical becomes orthodox. The smartphone, the internet, or renewable energy were once met with skepticism or resistance. Now they are central pillars of modern life. Yet even within those domains, new innovations must struggle against the inertia of what is already working well enough. The culture that once resisted the innovation now resists further evolution of it. The cycle continues. There is also a personal version of the innovation paradox. On an individual level, we often yearn to grow, to try new things, to reinvent ourselves. And yet, habits, fears, and identity can act as barriers. A person might dream of changing careers, starting a new creative project, or adopting a healthier lifestyle, but the thought of stepping into the unknown, of risking failure or losing status, can be paralyzing. We want transformation without disruption, evolution without uncertainty. But real innovation, whether in society, in business, or in the self, requires letting go of the known, if only temporarily. And still, despite the paradox, innovation persists. Some ideas break through. Some systems learn to adapt. Some individuals summon the courage to change, even when it's hard. Innovation survives because it doesn't need permission, it only needs persistence. Often, the most transformative breakthroughs come not from consensus, but from stubborn visionaries who see what others overlook and are willing to walk alone until others catch up. The innovation paradox, then, is not a flaw in progress but a feature of it. It reminds us that novelty alone is not enough, that the path to meaningful change is messy, nonlinear, and often resisted. It teaches us that to truly embrace innovation, we must do more than praise creativity, we must create cultures, systems, and mindsets that are willing to be uncomfortable. Only then can we bridge the gap between what we say we want and what we are actually willing to do to get there. The love paradox. The love paradox is the deeply human contradiction that while love requires vulnerability, openness, and the willingness to let someone deeply into our lives, those very conditions also expose us to pain, loss, and heartbreak. The more we love, the more we stand to lose, yet we continue to seek love, because without it, life feels incomplete, empty, or diminished. In essence, the paradox is this: to fully experience love, we must accept the risk of losing it. Love, whether romantic, platonic, or familial, is one of the most powerful forces in human life. It gives us meaning, connection, purpose, and joy. But love also creates emotional dependence, attachment, and longing. When we love someone, we allow them the power to affect us deeply, to comfort us, yes, but also to hurt us, disappoint us, or leave us. In trying to protect ourselves from these possibilities, by holding back, avoiding commitment, or suppressing feelings, we often block ourselves from experiencing the richness and depth that love can offer. This is the paradox in its rawest form: love demands vulnerability, but vulnerability makes us fragile. And yet, love cannot exist without it. An attempt to control, possess, or perfect love, to keep it safe and predictable, often leads to its deterioration. True love is not immune to pain, it is entwined with it. The very depth of our affection creates the potential for suffering, especially in times of separation, betrayal, or death. Psychologically, the love paradox plays out in the tension between autonomy and connection. Humans crave both independence and intimacy, but deep love often requires us to compromise, to merge lives, to give up some control. In loving others, we expand our sense of self to include another person, so much so that their joys and sorrows become our own. This merging is beautiful, but it also means that love can become a source of vulnerability and inner turmoil when things go wrong. There is also the fear that giving love freely might not be reciprocated, that we might offer our hearts only to be rejected or misunderstood. This fear holds many back from expressing their deepest feelings. And yet, the paradox persists: unless we risk love, we forfeit the possibility of truly receiving it. Philosophically and spiritually, the love paradox appears across traditions. Buddhist thought, for instance, teaches the importance of detached attachment, to love fully without clinging or attempting to control. Similarly, Christian teachings emphasize selfless, sacrificial love that gives without expecting in return. These ideas acknowledge that love's truest form often involves letting go of ego, of fear, of expectations. Ultimately, the love paradox reveals that love is both the source of our greatest joy and our deepest pain, but that it is precisely this depth, this risk, that makes love meaningful. The possibility of loss gives love its urgency and beauty. To love is to open ourselves, to another person, to uncertainty, to transformation, and in doing so, we don't weaken ourselves, we become more human. The courage to love, despite the cost, is not a flaw in the human condition, it is its finest expression. Intention Paradox. The intention paradox speaks to the strange and often counterintuitive nature of human desire and will, that the harder we try to bring about certain outcomes through conscious intention, the more elusive those outcomes can become. It plays out in a quiet tension between effort and surrender, control and spontaneity, revealing a deep truth about how some of life's most meaningful experiences, love, happiness, creativity, even sleep, cannot be forced into being, no matter how desperately we want them. At its core, the paradox suggests that intention alone is not always enough, and in some cases, it may even work against us. We set our minds to something, inner peace, confidence, originality, and yet, the very act of willing it into existence can create resistance. The person who tries too hard to be natural becomes awkward. The one who overthinks relaxation ends up tense. The writer striving for brilliance stares at a blank page. This is the essence of the paradox. The more we try to directly will certain inner states or subtle experiences, the more they slip through our fingers. It challenges the notion that intention is a straightforward path to outcome. While intention is often the seed of change, it does not guarantee control over the process. Some of life's richest states arise indirectly, as byproducts rather than goals. Joy appears not when we demand it, but when we lose ourselves in a moment. Creativity flows not when we chase originality, but when we become absorbed in the act of creating. Intimacy deepens not when we try to force connection, but when we stop trying and allow vulnerability to emerge naturally. This paradox does not suggest that intention is useless, only that it must be paired with humility and awareness. Intention sets direction, but its fulfillment often requires letting go. There is a wisdom in knowing when to push and when to release, when to act and when to trust. Sometimes we must try, but other times, we must stop trying to try. This is not passivity, it is a deeper form of engagement, one that honors the complexity of human experience and the limits of control. The intention paradox also reveals something essential about our relationship with ourselves. The desire for transformation, of behavior, emotion, or mindset, often comes from a genuine longing to be better, freer, or more at peace. But this very desire can turn into self-judgment, into pressure, into internal resistance. We become tangled in loops of trying to change, trying to improve, trying to be enough, and in doing so, we lose the very presence or acceptance that would make change possible. The paradox teaches that sometimes, the most powerful movement forward is not another act of will, but a moment of stillness. In the end, the intention paradox invites us to examine the quality of our striving. It asks whether our intentions are fueled by fear or by trust, by force or by openness. It does not reject effort but reframes it, suggesting that some of the most transformative outcomes in life cannot be coerced, they must be invited, allowed, and sometimes, simply waited for. In this way, the paradox is not a dead end, but a doorway, an invitation to hold our intentions lightly, to act with care, and to leave space for the unexpected grace that often arrives when we stop trying so hard. Peace Paradox. The peace paradox is the subtle and often surprising realization that the more desperately we chase peace, through external control, avoidance of discomfort, or rigid attempts to quiet the mind, the more elusive it becomes. True peace, paradoxically, tends to arise not from struggling against chaos or silencing life's noise, but from turning toward it with openness, acceptance, and humility. The harder we try to force peace, the further it drifts from our reach. But when we stop grasping for it, it quietly begins to settle in. In a world saturated with anxiety, overstimulation, and urgency, the desire for inner peace is deeply human. We want relief from the constant noise, from emotional storms, from the unresolved tensions within us and around us. Naturally, we seek to eliminate the sources of our unrest, cutting off toxic relationships, escaping into entertainment, avoiding difficult emotions, or organizing every detail of life in the hope that stillness will finally come. But peace is not the absence of problems, noise, or discomfort. It is not a perfect state we arrive at when everything is finally in order. That idea is the illusion at the heart of the paradox. Because life is in constant motion, because our minds are inherently restless, and because suffering is part of the human condition, the attempt to force peace through control becomes a kind of war against reality. And this war creates more tension, more resistance, more inner division, the very opposite of peace. Ironically, it is often when we stop resisting the chaos that something unexpected happens, we find a calm center within it. Peace reveals itself not in the absence of storms, but in learning how to stand still within them. When we accept that discomfort, uncertainty, and change are part of life, not enemies to be defeated, we stop feeding the inner conflict that keeps us agitated. Surrender, not suppression, becomes the doorway to serenity. The peace paradox also plays out in our relationships. People often seek peace by avoiding conflict, suppressing their feelings, or pleasing others at the expense of their own truth. But this surface-level harmony breeds inner turmoil and unspoken resentment. Lasting peace in relationships comes not from avoiding discomfort, but from the courage to have hard conversations, to be vulnerable, and to face the truth without running. It is through honesty, not avoidance, that genuine connection and emotional peace are born. On a spiritual level, many traditions echo this paradox. The ego seeks peace by striving, but the soul finds it in stillness. When we try to achieve peace like a task or trophy, through spiritual performance or constant self-improvement, we subtly reinforce the belief that we are not enough as we are. Yet when we stop striving and simply become present, aware of breath, of being, of this moment, peace begins to rise, not as a prize, but as a presence. This paradox invites a radical rethinking of what peace truly means. It's not a destination at the end of a perfect life, it's a way of being that grows within imperfection. Peace is not something we get, it's something we allow. We do not conquer our way to peace, we soften into it. In the end, the peace paradox teaches that peace isn't found in escaping life, but in embracing it. It doesn't come from shielding ourselves from pain, but from making peace with pain. It doesn't require silencing the world, but listening more deeply to what it's trying to teach us. When we stop demanding that life be peaceful and begin to meet it as it is, with openness, compassion, and presence, we often find that peace was already there, waiting in the stillness beneath the noise. The knowledge paradox. The knowledge paradox is the paradoxical insight that the more we know, the more we realize how little we actually understand. As knowledge expands, so too does our awareness of its limits, leading to a humbling sense of uncertainty rather than the confidence we might expect. This phenomenon reveals that the pursuit of knowledge often uncovers not answers, but deeper, more complex questions. The roots of this paradox can be traced back to ancient philosophy, particularly in the words attributed to Socrates, "I know that I know nothing." Far from being a statement of ignorance, this was a recognition of intellectual humility, the understanding that true wisdom lies in acknowledging the vastness of the unknown. The more deeply one studies a subject, the more they encounter its nuances, contradictions, and unexplored dimensions. A beginner might feel certain and confident, but an expert often feels cautious, precisely because they have glimpsed the complexity beneath the surface. This is known in psychology as the Dunning-Kruger effect. Those with limited knowledge tend to overestimate their understanding, while those with deeper knowledge tend to underestimate theirs. As people learn more, they become more aware of what they don't know, and that awareness grows in proportion to their education. The knowledge paradox also manifests on a societal level. Scientific and technological progress often answers old questions only to raise new, more difficult ones. Discovering the structure of DNA, for example, opened up entire fields of genetics, ethics, and biotechnology, each bringing more questions than the original mystery resolved. Similarly, advances in physics, such as quantum mechanics or cosmology, have expanded our understanding of the universe, but also revealed profound mysteries about the nature of time, matter, and consciousness. Moreover, as knowledge becomes more specialized, it often becomes less accessible to outsiders. This leads to a paradox where society knows more collectively than ever before, but individuals may feel more confused or alienated. In an age of information overload, the ability to filter, interpret, and contextualize knowledge becomes more valuable than knowledge itself. There is also a philosophical layer to the knowledge paradox. The closer we get to ultimate truths, the more we encounter the limitations of human reason and language. Some questions, about consciousness, existence, morality, or the infinite, may never yield definitive answers. In this sense, knowledge does not resolve mystery, it deepens it. The pursuit of understanding becomes a journey not toward mastery, but toward ever greater wonder. Ultimately, the knowledge paradox invites us to approach learning not as a way to conquer the unknown, but as a means of living more wisely within it. It reminds us that humility, curiosity, and the willingness to revise our beliefs are marks not of ignorance, but of genuine intelligence. In acknowledging the limits of what we know, we open the door to deeper insight, and perhaps, to wisdom. The paradox of choice. The paradox of choice is a psychological and philosophical idea that challenges the common assumption that more choices lead to greater freedom and happiness. Coined and explored in depth by psychologist Barry Schwartz in his book The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, the paradox reveals that while some choice is undoubtedly beneficial, an overabundance of options can lead to anxiety, dissatisfaction, and even paralysis. In a society that equates freedom with having numerous alternatives, the ability to choose seems to be the ultimate expression of autonomy. From consumer goods to career paths to lifestyle decisions, modern individuals are presented with an overwhelming array of options. At first glance, this abundance appears to empower people to tailor their lives to their exact preferences. However, the paradox emerges when the sheer volume of possibilities leads not to satisfaction, but to stress. One of the key mechanisms behind this paradox is the burden of decision-making. With more choices, people feel a greater responsibility to make the right one. The fear of missing out on a potentially better option can result in decision paralysis, where individuals delay or avoid making a choice altogether. Even after a decision is made, the mind often replays what-if scenarios, questioning whether a different choice might have yielded a better outcome. This leads to regret and self-blame, particularly in cultures that place personal responsibility for happiness on the individual. Another consequence is the rise in unrealistic expectations. When there are many alternatives, people expect more from the choice they make. If the result is anything short of perfect, it feels disappointing, not because it's bad, but because of how much better it could have been in theory. This constant comparison to imagined alternatives diminishes satisfaction with the actual outcome. The paradox is especially evident in consumer behavior. For example, when a person enters a store and sees 30 types of toothpaste, the decision becomes more exhausting than empowering. Studies have shown that people are more likely to make a purchase, and be happier with it, when offered fewer options. Too many choices tax cognitive resources, cause emotional strain, and often lead to a feeling of emptiness rather than fulfillment. In essence, the paradox of choice reveals that while autonomy and self-determination are vital to human well-being, there is a point at which the freedom to choose turns into a psychological burden. Simplicity, constraints, and well-designed limits can paradoxically foster a greater sense of clarity, peace, and satisfaction. Automation Paradox. The automation paradox emerges from the strange and uneasy relationship between human effort and technological convenience. It is the contradiction that the more we automate tasks to make life easier, the more complex the remaining human responsibilities often become. As machines take over routine, repetitive, and mechanical functions, what is left for people tends to be what is most ambiguous, high stakes, or difficult to manage. In trying to reduce human labor, automation often increases the demand for human vigilance, skill, and judgment in unexpected ways. At first glance, automation appears to be the ultimate solution to inefficiency. It promises speed, precision, and the elimination of error. We automate to save time, reduce costs, and free people from mundane tasks so they can focus on more important work, or so the theory goes. But in practice, this shift creates a new kind of burden. When systems run smoothly on their own, people become less practiced at intervening. Yet when those systems fail, it is the human who must step in, often under pressure, with little context, and after long periods of disengagement. Ironically, as machines become more capable, humans are asked to perform only in the moments of greatest complexity or crisis. Nowhere is this paradox more evident than in fields like aviation or medicine. Pilots today spend much of their time monitoring automated flight systems rather than manually flying planes. But when those systems fail, due to rare but catastrophic malfunctions, it is the pilot who must instantly make high-stakes decisions under extreme conditions. Similarly, in modern hospitals, automated monitoring systems and diagnostic tools assist doctors and nurses, but when something goes wrong or an edge case arises, human intervention becomes crucial. And because that intervention is needed less frequently, the opportunity to maintain sharp, hands-on skills dwindles. Automation, in this sense, can quietly erode the very expertise it requires in emergencies. The paradox also plays out in everyday life. Smart devices, algorithms, and digital assistants remove friction from our routines, but they can also dull our awareness. GPS apps guide us everywhere, and we become less skilled at navigating on our own. Autocorrect fixes our spelling, and we forget how to spell. Recommendation engines choose what we watch, read, or listen to, narrowing our choices while appearing to offer endless variety. The more we delegate to machines, the less engaged we become with the choices and skills that used to shape our thinking. There is also a social dimension to the automation paradox. As industries automate, the promise is often that workers will be freed up to do more creative or meaningful work. But in reality, automation can also displace workers faster than new roles are created, leading to a growing divide between those who design and manage automated systems and those whose work is made obsolete by them. The very tools meant to elevate human potential can, if misused, erode livelihoods and deepen inequality. Yet this paradox is not an argument against automation, it is a caution. It reveals that technology, no matter how advanced, does not absolve us of responsibility, it changes the nature of that responsibility. It shifts our role from operator to overseer, from doer to decision maker, and that shift requires a new kind of attentiveness. To work well alongside automation, we need to stay curious, practice our skills, and remain intimately familiar with the systems we rely on, even when they seem to run themselves. Ultimately, the automation paradox reminds us that ease is not the same as progress. True progress involves not just making tasks easier, but making people stronger, wiser, and more capable in the process. Automation should not be a path to disengagement, but to refinement, an opportunity to reimagine human contribution in a world where machines can do more, but never everything. Democracy Paradox. The democracy paradox lies in the unsettling tension between the ideals of democratic freedom and the realities of how that freedom is exercised. At its heart is this contradiction: democracy is built on the belief in the collective wisdom of the people, yet it can lead to decisions that undermine the very freedoms and institutions that made such choices possible. In giving power to everyone, democracy also gives power to those who may not value democracy itself. It creates the possibility that people, through their free will, may choose to limit their own freedom, or take it from others. This paradox becomes most visible in moments when democratic systems produce outcomes that seem anti-democratic, when citizens vote for authoritarian leaders, support discriminatory policies, or reject pluralism and dissent. In theory, democracy is the triumph of the people's voice. In practice, that voice can be influenced by fear, misinformation, tribalism, or short-term interests. The very openness that defines democracy, its tolerance, its freedom of expression, its protection of individual rights, can be used by those who seek to dismantle it from within. This is the fragility at the center of the system: it must allow dissent, even from those who oppose its principles. The paradox is especially sharp when democracy is treated as a static achievement rather than a living process. People may grow disillusioned with slow reforms, with compromise, with the messiness of governance, and turn instead to leaders who promise clarity, strength, or purity. Ironically, democracy's own tolerance for diverse views can make it vulnerable to movements that reject diversity. It must permit voices that question it, even as it risks being silenced by them. And yet, this very risk is what gives democracy its moral weight. It does not guarantee perfect outcomes, it allows flawed, human ones. It trusts that, over time, open discourse and civic engagement will correct course, that truth will outlast propaganda, that participation will lead to wisdom. The paradox is that democracy works best when people actively protect it, even from themselves. It requires constant vigilance, education, humility, and renewal. It asks citizens not only to speak, but to listen, not only to vote, but to understand, not only to claim rights, but to uphold responsibilities. There is also a personal layer to the paradox. Democracy depends on individuals acting collectively, millions of private choices shaping public life. But this requires people to think beyond self-interest, to act not just as consumers or tribes, but as citizens. When the emphasis shifts too far toward individualism or identity-based conflict, the common good phrase. Thus, democracy gives power to the people, but it survives only if the people choose to use that power wisely, with empathy and foresight. The democracy paradox, then, is not a flaw in the system, but a reflection of the human condition. We long for freedom but are often afraid of its consequences. We want voice, but not always responsibility. We celebrate choice, but resist complexity. Democracy holds a mirror to these contradictions and asks us to live within them anyway, not with cynicism, but with courage. In the end, the paradox is not a reason to abandon democracy, but to deepen it. To understand that its strength lies not in perfection, but in its ability to recover, adapt, and include. Democracy remains one of humanity's boldest experiments, to entrust freedom to fallible people, and to believe that through reason, compassion, and participation, they can rise to meet it. Education Paradox. The education paradox is the deeply intriguing and sometimes uncomfortable truth that the more educated we become, through formal schooling, critical thinking, and exposure to knowledge, the more we often realize how little we truly know. Education, rather than filling us with certainty, tends to expand our awareness of uncertainty, complexity, and the vastness of what remains beyond our grasp. In seeking clarity, we often encounter more questions than answers. In gaining knowledge, we confront the boundaries of knowledge itself. At first glance, this seems contradictory. Education is typically seen as a path to mastery, understanding, and truth. It is expected to equip us with answers, skills, and confidence. But for those who go far along that path, whether in science, philosophy, literature, or any serious discipline, there comes a moment of revelation. The horizon keeps receding. Each answer opens into more questions. Each theory is met with exceptions. Each conclusion is provisional, waiting for the next revision. This is the paradox. Education doesn't just enlighten, it humbles. It teaches us that intelligence lies not in knowing everything, but in recognizing the limits of what can be known. The truly educated person is not the one who is most certain, but the one most comfortable with ambiguity, most willing to revise their beliefs, and most capable of holding opposing ideas in tension. The education paradox also plays out in society. We often assume that more education will automatically lead to wiser decisions, stronger moral values, or more rational behavior. And while education does improve critical thinking and expands perspective, it does not guarantee wisdom or virtue. An educated person may use their knowledge to manipulate rather than to understand. A society full of degrees and data can still be deeply divided, especially if education becomes a tool of arrogance rather than empathy. Furthermore, as education deepens, it often disconnects us from simplicity. The more theories we learn, the harder it becomes to see the world through innocent eyes. We may grow cynical, skeptical, or paralyzed by analysis. In trying to understand everything, we risk overthinking, losing touch with intuition, or failing to act. In this way, education can complicate what was once clear, not because it is wrong, but because it reveals a more nuanced, often messy reality. Yet, this paradox is not an argument against education. On the contrary, it is what makes education powerful. It refines the mind by stretching it, not by stuffing it. It transforms the learner not by giving them final answers, but by teaching them how to question, how to adapt, and how to stay open. The discomfort of realizing we don't know as much as we thought is not a failure of education, it is its success. In the end, the education paradox is a call to humility. It reminds us that the point of learning is not to dominate others with facts or to arrive at some ultimate truth, but to become more human, more curious, more compassionate, more capable of living with uncertainty. A well-educated mind is not necessarily the one that knows the most, but the one that continues learning, questioning, and growing long after formal schooling ends. And so, the paradox remains: the more we know, the more we understand how much we don't know. But in that recognition lies the beginning of true wisdom. Friendship Paradox. The friendship paradox is a quiet, counterintuitive truth hiding in the fabric of our social lives, and it reveals itself through the surprising lens of mathematics. It goes like this: on average, your friends have more friends than you do. At first, this sounds impossible or insulting, as if it implies you're somehow less connected or less popular. But the paradox is not a statement about any one person's value. It's a statistical observation that emerges from the way networks, like those of friendship, are structured. To understand it, imagine a social network as a web of people and their connections. Some individuals are highly connected, extroverts, community leaders, influencers, while others have smaller circles. These highly connected individuals are more likely to show up in other people's friend lists simply because they have more friends. So when you look at your own friends, you're more likely to be seeing those highly connected people than the ones who are less connected. It's not that your friends are inherently more sociable than you, it's that people with more connections are more statistically visible across the network. They're overrepresented. This is the paradox: you may feel average or even well-connected, and yet still find that most of the people you know seem more connected than you. And that feeling isn't an illusion, it's backed by network mathematics. The same principle applies beyond friendships. In many types of networks, social, professional, or even academic citation networks, most individuals are connected to nodes that are themselves unusually well connected. Your co-workers, on average, have more colleagues than you. The papers you read are, on average, cited more often than the papers you write. In life, this mathematical insight can subtly shape perception. It can lead to feelings of inadequacy or social comparison. If it seems like everyone else has more friends, more followers, more connections, you might wonder what you're missing. But the friendship paradox offers a quiet reassurance: you're not missing anything. You're just caught in a statistical reality that favors visibility over balance. The people who are more connected are simply more likely to appear in your circle, not because you are less, but because they are more numerous in the landscape of connections. It's a reminder that what we perceive in our social environments is not always a reliable reflection of reality. The friendship paradox teaches us to be cautious with comparisons. It shows us that the feeling of being surrounded by people who seem more connected or more in the loop is not necessarily a sign that we are out of place, but a mathematical consequence of how social networks behave. In this way, the paradox is more than just a curiosity of math, it's a lesson in perspective. It invites us to question our assumptions about belonging, popularity, and self-worth. It reminds us that data and perception can diverge, and that understanding the patterns beneath the surface can help us move through the social world with a little more clarity and a little less self-doubt. Helping Paradox. The helping paradox reveals itself in the strange and often uncomfortable truth that offering help can sometimes hinder, while withholding help can sometimes empower. It plays out in the fine and shifting line between support and interference, between lifting someone up and holding them back. At its heart is a deeply human tension, the desire to alleviate suffering or difficulty in others, met with the reality that growth, strength, and resilience often emerge through struggle, not in spite of it. Helping, at first glance, seems unquestionably good. It's one of the most natural impulses, to ease another's burden, to step in when someone stumbles, to share what we have with those in need. Acts of help are rooted in compassion, and they can be vital. But the paradox arises when help crosses the boundary from empowering to enabling. When we do for others what they must ultimately learn to do for themselves, we may unintentionally delay their growth. We risk creating dependence instead of resilience, comfort instead of capability. This paradox can be especially sharp in relationships where care is deep, between parents and children, teachers and students, friends or partners. A parent who always steps in to solve a child's problems may prevent the child from developing confidence in their own abilities. A friend who constantly offers advice may rob another of the space to find their own answers. The intention is good, but the effect can quietly erode a person's sense of agency. True support often requires the patience to allow discomfort, to trust the other's process, and to resist the soothing urge to fix what is not ours to fix. Conversely, not helping, or stepping back, can feel cold or indifferent, but sometimes it is the greatest act of respect. It signals trust in the other person's capacity to navigate their own challenges. It says, "You are strong enough." Letting someone struggle, even fail, can be an expression of faith, not neglect. But this restraint is hard. It demands discernment, humility, and the ability to sit with our own discomfort as others face theirs. There is also a shadow side to helping that the paradox brings into view. Sometimes, we help not purely for the other's sake, but to fulfill our own need, to feel useful, important, or in control. Helping can become a performance, a subtle means of asserting superiority or escaping our own issues by focusing on someone else's. In such cases, the help may appear generous, but it is entangled with ego. The paradox warns us to examine not just what we do, but why we do it. None of this suggests that helping is wrong or that we should turn our backs on those in need. Rather, it invites a deeper form of help, one that empowers rather than rescues, that offers presence more than solutions. It reminds us that sometimes the most transformative support lies not in doing for someone, but in being with them. Not in speaking, but in listening. Not in offering advice, but in asking the kind of questions that help them uncover their own wisdom. The helping paradox is not a rejection of compassion, but a refinement of it. It challenges us to move beyond the simplicity of doing good into the complexity of doing good well. To help with awareness, not assumption. To give with sensitivity to timing, readiness, and the dignity of the one receiving. It teaches that real help doesn't always feel like help, it can feel like space, silence, patience, or faith. And that sometimes, the best way to help is to step back and let someone become the person they're capable of being, even if that path includes struggle. Jevons Paradox. Jevons Paradox is a compelling and often misunderstood principle that reveals how technological progress, specifically, increased efficiency in resource use, can paradoxically lead to greater overall consumption of that resource, rather than less. Named after the 19th-century British economist William Stanley Jevons, this paradox challenges the intuitive assumption that making something more efficient automatically leads to sustainability or conservation. Jevons observed this phenomenon during the Industrial Revolution when coal-powered steam engines were becoming more efficient. Logic suggested that as engines used less coal to produce the same amount of work, total coal consumption would decrease. But Jevons noticed the opposite: coal usage actually soared. Why? Because improved efficiency lowered the cost of using coal-powered energy, which in turn made it more attractive and accessible. As a result, coal-powered machinery was adopted more widely across industries, and overall demand for coal increased dramatically. This principle applies well beyond coal. In modern life, it reveals itself in various areas, from energy consumption to digital technology to transportation. Take, for instance, fuel-efficient cars. As cars consume less fuel per kilometer, driving becomes cheaper. This lower cost encourages people to drive more, potentially offsetting or even exceeding the fuel savings that efficiency was meant to deliver. Similarly, advances in computing make devices more energy efficient, but as they become cheaper and faster, we produce and use more of them, driving up total energy consumption. Herein lies the paradox: improvements in efficiency, meant to reduce usage, often lead to behavioral and economic shifts that result in more consumption overall. Efficiency reduces cost, and reduced cost increases demand. The better we get at using a resource, the more we end up using it. Jevons Paradox challenges the comforting belief that technology alone can solve environmental and sustainability problems. It suggests that relying purely on efficiency, without changing consumption patterns or implementing broader systemic controls, may lead us into a trap where progress breeds more resource use rather than less. This paradox also exposes a deeper psychological and social truth: humans tend to respond to increased convenience with increased usage. When something becomes easier, cheaper, or faster, we rarely stop to ask whether we truly need more of it. Instead, we allow access to drive desire. Efficiency becomes an enabler of excess. To navigate Jevons Paradox wisely, society must look beyond technological fixes and consider the structures and incentives that shape consumption. This may involve implementing policies that cap usage, price externalities, such as pollution, or shift cultural values away from constant growth and toward sustainability. In some cases, solutions require not just more efficient tools, but more conscious restraint and systemic change. Ultimately, Jevons Paradox offers a humbling lesson: progress is not always linear, and solutions are rarely as simple as they seem. If we want to build a sustainable future, we must pair innovation with intention, ensuring that efficiency is not merely a way to do more, but a step toward doing better. Journey Paradox. The journey paradox is the profound and often overlooked truth that while we set out on life's journeys with specific goals in mind, success, love, self-discovery, enlightenment, it is rarely the destination that defines us. Instead, it is the path itself, with all its detours, delays, and difficulties, that shapes who we become. The paradox lies in the fact that we are drawn to a goal, but it is the pursuit, not the achievement, that ultimately matters most. From childhood, we are taught to value outcomes: the diploma, the job, the house, the relationship, the recognition. We imagine that fulfillment lies somewhere in the future, waiting to be unlocked once we arrive at the right place, earn the right reward, or reach the right version of ourselves. We chase the idea that happiness lies at the end of the road, and that the road itself is merely a means to get there. But over time, the journey paradox reveals itself. We realize that the destination often feels fleeting or even anticlimactic. The long-sought promotion brings a momentary high, but not lasting peace. The goal weighed on the scale may satisfy for a day, but not cure deeper self-worth issues. The dream home, the award, the milestone, all eventually fade into the background of a still unfolding life. What remains vivid in memory is the struggle to get there, the discipline, the growth, the perseverance, the moments of doubt and clarity. Those are the chapters that shape our identity. Ironically, the more we obsess over reaching a destination, the more we risk missing the richness of the journey itself. We become so fixated on the future that we lose touch with the present, the very space in which life is lived. We rush, compare, and worry, believing that meaning will be delivered when the goal is finally attained. But meaning is not delivered, it is discovered, often in the quiet, unremarkable moments along the way. The journey paradox also reveals a spiritual truth: the process is often the point. Growth doesn't occur in arrival but in movement. It is in the falling and rising, the breaking and mending, the striving and surrendering that we are refined. Even our setbacks and so-called failures often teach us more than our triumphs. Sometimes, we head toward one goal only to discover that it was never really about that goal, it was about the transformation the pursuit demanded. And perhaps the most humbling part of this paradox is that we often don't know we've been changed until we look back. In hindsight, the value of the journey becomes clear. We see how we evolved, how the struggle gave us depth, how the detours led to something better than what we had originally imagined. The pain, the waiting, the uncertainty, they weren't obstacles to the path. They were the path. To live wisely, then, is to embrace the journey not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. To find joy not just in arriving, but in moving. To recognize that every moment, even the uncertain, mundane, or difficult, is part of the larger unfolding of who we are becoming. The journey paradox asks us to walk forward with purpose, but not to be so obsessed with the horizon that we forget to feel the ground beneath our feet. For in the end, the journey doesn't just lead us to our destination, it becomes the destination itself. Letting go paradox. The letting go paradox is the profound and often counterintuitive truth that only by releasing our tight grip on people, outcomes, or identities can we begin to experience peace, freedom, and genuine connection. The more we try to control life, clinging to what we fear losing, the more tension, suffering, and instability we invite. Yet when we loosen our hold and surrender to uncertainty, we often receive more than we ever expected. In letting go, we paradoxically gain. Human beings are wired to hold on. We hold on to relationships because they feel safe, to plans because they offer predictability, to goals because they give us identity, and to beliefs because they make the world feel understandable. Letting go, by contrast, feels like loss, like failure, like drifting into chaos. We fear that if we release our grip, we will fall apart, or worse, disappear into irrelevance or regret. So we resist. But life is change. People evolve, seasons shift, bodies age, circumstances unravel, and no matter how fiercely we cling, nothing stays fixed. The paradox emerges in this dynamic tension. Holding on feels like control, but it often breeds anxiety, disappointment, and suffering. Letting go feels like giving up, but it frequently becomes the doorway to inner peace, healing, and unexpected beauty. Consider love. Many relationships suffer not because of a lack of care, but because of a refusal to let go, of control, of expectations, of the way things used to be. When we try to possess or mold another person to fit our ideals, love becomes a cage. But when we let go, of needing to be right, of needing to be needed, space opens for trust, authenticity, and growth. The relationship often deepens, not diminishes. The paradox also appears in ambition and goals. While striving towards success is noble, obsessive attachment to a specific outcome can create rigidity, burnout, or deep disappointment if life unfolds differently. Ironically, those who succeed most sustainably often do so not by forcing results, but by letting go of control and staying open to new paths, adapting when necessary. In surrendering the illusion of control, they move with the current of life rather than constantly fighting it. Even in the realm of personal identity, the paradox holds true. We all carry stories about who we are, stories of being strong, being broken, being important, being unlovable. But these stories can become prisons. Letting go of outdated self-images, though terrifying, is often the only way to grow. When we release who we thought we were supposed to be, we make space for who we actually are to emerge. Letting go is not passive. It's not about giving up or abandoning effort. It is a conscious act of trust, a deep acknowledgement that we cannot control everything, and that clinging too tightly only strangles what we're trying to preserve. It is the choice to move forward, unburdened by the weight of what cannot be changed. The paradox lies in this truth: letting go often feels like losing something, when in fact it is making room for something greater. We let go of resentment, and find peace. We let go of perfection, and find joy. We let go of needing answers, and find wisdom. The hand that releases is the hand that can now receive. Ultimately, the letting go paradox teaches us a quiet form of strength, the strength to accept impermanence, to live without guarantees, and to trust that life, in its mystery, often knows better than we do. It is only when we stop trying to force things into place that they begin to fall into place on their own. And it is only when we let go of needing life to be a certain way that we begin to fully live. Paradox of Thrift. The paradox of thrift is a fascinating and counterintuitive idea from economics that reveals how behavior that is wise and responsible on an individual level can have harmful effects when practiced collectively. It states that while saving money is prudent for a single person or household, if everyone in a society suddenly starts saving more and spending less, the economy as a whole can suffer, leading to lower income, fewer jobs, and ultimately, less savings for everyone. To understand this paradox, we have to examine the role spending plays in a functioning economy. In any economy, one person's spending becomes another person's income. When you buy groceries, your money becomes the grocer's revenue. When you eat at a restaurant, your money helps pay the waiter's wages. In this way, consumer spending fuels economic growth by circulating money through businesses, wages, and production. Now imagine a situation where people become afraid, perhaps due to an economic downturn, job insecurity, or even just rising prices. In response, everyone tightens their belt and starts saving more. At first glance, this seems responsible. But when large numbers of people reduce their spending simultaneously, businesses lose revenue. In turn, they may cut wages, lay off workers, or slow down production. Unemployment rises, consumer confidence falls even further, and total economic output shrinks. Ironically, by saving more as a group, people may end up with lower incomes, and therefore, they may be unable to save at all. This is the paradox: what is rational and beneficial for one person, being thrifty, can be irrational and damaging when everyone does it at once. In a healthy economy, there needs to be a balance between saving and spending. Too much spending leads to debt and inflation. But too much saving, especially during a recession, can prolong economic pain by reducing demand when it is most needed. Governments and central banks are often called to step in during such times. They may increase public spending, lower interest rates, or send direct aid to households, not only to help people directly, but to stimulate spending and break the cycle of collective thrift that's harming the economy. This is one of the reasons why stimulus packages during recessions focus on encouraging consumption, to restore the flow of money through the system and boost confidence. Beyond economics, the paradox of thrift offers a deeper life lesson. It warns us that wisdom in isolation may become folly in community, and that context matters. It challenges the purely individualistic mindset and reminds us that we are part of interdependent systems, economic, social, and ecological, where our choices ripple outward. It's not that thrift is wrong. In fact, saving is essential for personal security and long-term planning. But this paradox asks us to consider timing, balance, and scale. Saving is good, unless everyone does it all at once in a fearful response to crisis. Then, ironically, it can make everyone poorer. In this way, the paradox of thrift reveals a quiet truth about human life. Sometimes, the good of the whole depends not just on individual prudence, but on collective trust and shared action. And sometimes, what feels safest on a personal level may require rethinking when viewed through the lens of the greater good. Security Paradox. The security paradox is the unsettling truth that the more we strive for absolute safety and protection, in our lives, relationships, finances, or society, the more we can end up feeling insecure, constrained, or even threatened. It exposes a fundamental tension between the human desire for control and the reality that life is inherently unpredictable. In attempting to eliminate all risk, we can paradoxically create lives that feel brittle, anxious, and less free. At its surface, the pursuit of security seems natural and rational. We lock our doors, save money, avoid dangerous situations, seek stable jobs, and build systems designed to protect ourselves and those we care about. But the paradox begins to unfold when the pursuit of security becomes obsessive or absolute. When safety becomes the ultimate goal, over freedom, growth, or authenticity, it can trap us in a life that is narrow, stagnant, and ruled by fear. Consider personal relationships. Someone who fears abandonment may attempt to control every variable in a relationship to ensure they feel secure, seeking constant reassurance, avoiding vulnerability, or monitoring their partner's behavior. But instead of building a deeper bond, these actions often create tension, resentment, and emotional distance. The relationship becomes more fragile, not less. The tighter they grip, the more things slip through their fingers. Or think about financial security. It is wise to save and plan for the future, but when the fear of economic uncertainty dominates one's mindset, it can lead to an overly cautious life, avoiding investments, turning down career opportunities, or refusing to spend money even on experiences that bring joy. Ironically, this obsessive guarding against financial danger can result in a life not well lived, where comfort is bought at the expense of meaning and vitality. At the societal level, the security paradox appears in national policies and surveillance. In the name of safety, governments may restrict freedoms, monitor citizens, and build walls, literal or digital, to protect against real or imagined threats. Yet in doing so, they often erode the very values they claim to protect: liberty, trust, openness. A society that prioritizes security above all else may end up fostering a culture of fear, suspicion, and control, which in turn creates new threats from within. The deeper irony is that total security is an illusion. No amount of preparation can shield us from loss, change, or uncertainty. The world is dynamic, and the more we try to make it static for the sake of feeling safe, the more out of sync we become with reality. Attempts to control every outcome often leave us exhausted, hypervigilant, and less capable of dealing with the very challenges we fear. True security, then, is not found in eliminating risk, but in increasing resilience. It is not about building walls, but about cultivating the inner strength to adapt, endure, and grow through life's unpredictability. The most secure people are not those who avoid all danger, but those who trust themselves to face it. Emotional security comes from self-knowledge and authentic connection, not from control. Financial security comes from a balance of prudence and courage, not hoarding. And societal security thrives not in fear-driven policies, but in trust, cooperation, and flexibility. In this way, the security paradox teaches us that we must loosen our grip if we wish to feel truly grounded. It urges us to stop mistaking rigidity for strength, and to find a deeper sense of safety, not in shielding ourselves from life, but in embracing it with open eyes and steady hearts. The paradox of inquiry. The paradox of inquiry is a quiet dilemma woven into the very nature of human curiosity. It poses a simple yet profound question: how can one search for something when one does not know what it is? If you already know what you are looking for, then the search is unnecessary. But if you do not know what you are looking for, how will you even recognize it when you find it? This puzzle lies at the heart of all learning and discovery, forming a tension between ignorance and understanding that we live with every time we seek to know. It emerges not only in philosophy, where it was famously raised by Plato in the dialogue Meno, but in everyday life, when we try to change, to understand ourselves, or to reach goals not yet clear in our minds. A person yearning for meaning might set off on a spiritual path, but if they do not know what meaning looks like, how do they know they are not mistaking illusion for insight? A scientist investigates the unknown, but how does she begin asking the right questions if she has no idea what the answer could be? The paradox of inquiry reveals this subtle blindness. To begin to look, we must have some flicker of recognition, yet if we already possess it, the search feels redundant. And yet, people continue to learn. We inquire constantly, sometimes fumbling, sometimes discovering more than we intended. This paradox doesn't halt inquiry, it shapes it. It suggests that we always begin from a place of partial knowledge, with guesses, intuitions, or fragments that guide the search. We never start from total ignorance, nor do we ever possess the whole picture in advance. There is a circular movement here. We inquire because we suspect something is there to be known, and in the process of looking, we refine both the question and our understanding of the answer. What initially seems like a roadblock to inquiry turns out to be its very condition. The paradox lives not to dissuade us from seeking but to remind us of the strange humility at the heart of the pursuit of truth. It whispers that every search begins in the dark, but not in complete darkness. There is always a hint of light, even if it is just the knowledge that something is missing. This flicker is enough. It's what stirs us to begin. The time paradox. The time paradox is the profound and universal contradiction that the more we try to control time, the more it seems to slip away, yet when we surrender to the present moment, we often feel as though we have more of it. At the surface, time appears linear and objective, measured in seconds, minutes, hours, and days. But psychologically and experientially, time is deeply subjective. It stretches and shrinks depending on what we're doing, how we feel, and where our attention lies. The paradox emerges when we realize that our obsession with saving time often leads to feeling more rushed, while slowing down can actually make life feel fuller, richer, and longer. In modern life, we're constantly chasing time. We schedule, optimize, multitask, and automate in order to do more in less time. Yet despite our tools and technologies, we often end up feeling busier, more stressed, and less present. This is the illusion of efficiency. The faster we try to move, the more time seems to vanish. A life lived in constant acceleration rarely feels satisfying, it feels like it's slipping by unnoticed. Conversely, when we allow ourselves to be fully in the moment, whether we're absorbed in conversation, walking in nature, creating something, or even just being still, time seems to slow down. These are the moments that linger in memory and shape our sense of a life well lived. Ironically, by not rushing, we seem to gain time, or at least, we feel it more deeply. There's also a deeper emotional layer to the time paradox. We often live caught between regret over the past and anxiety about the future, rarely inhabiting the present. The more we dwell on time lost or fear time running out, the less we engage with what's actually in front of us. And yet, it's only in the present, the now, that time is real, accessible, and alive. Trying to hold on to time pulls us out of it. In relationships, too, this paradox plays out. We rush through time with loved ones, thinking there will always be more of it. But real connection requires slowing down, being fully there. It's often not the amount of time spent with someone, but the quality of that time, that defines a bond. And quality time can't be forced or faked, it requires presence. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of the time paradox is this: time is both our most finite resource and the one we treat as endlessly renewable, until it's not. We save money, protect our health, safeguard our possessions, but we often waste our time, only realizing its value when it's nearly gone. And yet, those who live with awareness of time's limits tend to cherish it more fully, making deliberate choices that expand their experience of it. In essence, the time paradox teaches us that time isn't something we own or manage, it's something we inhabit. We don't gain more time by doing more things. We gain it by being more present in what we're doing. And in that presence, time doesn't just pass, it unfolds, expands, and enriches us. Work paradox. The work paradox is the curious and often painful reality that while work is essential to our survival, identity, and sense of purpose, it can also become a source of burnout, meaninglessness, and disconnection when pursued too rigidly or obsessively. It reveals the tension between two conflicting truths, that meaningful work gives life structure and dignity, yet over-identification with work can strip life of joy, balance, and even meaning itself. On one hand, work is foundational to human life. It is how we provide for ourselves and others, how we express creativity, how we build value in the world. People often find deep fulfillment in their work, whether it's raising children, designing architecture, teaching, farming, healing, or building businesses. Through work, we contribute, we grow, we connect. It can offer pride, rhythm, challenge, and community. But here is where the paradox begins to unfold: the very thing that gives us purpose can also imprison us. The desire to be productive, successful, or secure can tip into overwork, obsession, or dependency. Work begins to devour not only time but identity. We no longer have a job, we are our job. And in this over-identification, we risk losing touch with the fuller dimensions of life, relationships, rest, play, creativity, and even ourselves. Ironically, the more we sacrifice for work in the name of success, the more life can start to feel narrow, hollow, or out of balance. We may achieve professional milestones yet feel strangely empty. We may become highly efficient yet increasingly numb. In chasing productivity, we can lose the very things that make us feel truly alive. The paradox deepens in modern culture, which often glorifies hustle and grind. Busyness is worn as a badge of honor, and worth is tied to output. Rest becomes guilt-inducing. Leisure becomes unproductive. In this mindset, even personal growth can be repackaged as performance. Work infiltrates not only our days, but our sense of self. We are taught that to be valuable, we must be useful, constantly doing, achieving, improving. But humans are not machines. We need pauses, variation, time to simply be. Yet, the solution is not to abandon work, nor to see it as inherently negative. Rather, the work paradox invites a reframing. It asks us to find a healthier relationship with work, one that honors its value without letting it dominate our lives. Work is a part of life, not the whole of it. Meaningful work is most sustainable when it coexists with rest, joy, love, and time for reflection. Interestingly, some of the most rewarding work arises not from striving, but from alignment, when what we do connects with who we are. This doesn't mean every job must be a dream job, but that we find purpose not only in the role itself, but in how we show up to it, and in the way it fits into a broader, more balanced life. Ultimately, the work paradox reveals that while we need work, we also need freedom from it. We need purpose, but not pressure. We need to contribute, but also to pause, reflect, and reconnect with the deeper sources of meaning. In recognizing that we are more than what we produce, we begin to reclaim a fuller version of ourselves, one in which work serves life, rather than consumes it. And so, the paradox holds, work gives life meaning, but it cannot be the only meaning. To work well is to know when to work, and when to let go. The creativity paradox. The creativity paradox is the intriguing and often frustrating reality that creativity thrives under certain constraints, but with too much freedom, it can stall. While creativity is typically associated with boundless imagination, originality, and thinking outside the box, the paradox is that it often needs a box to push against. Rather than being hindered by limitations, creative thought is frequently sparked, shaped, and sharpened by them. At first glance, creativity seems to require complete freedom. The ideal might be pictured as an artist with unlimited time, no rules, and a blank canvas, or a writer free to pursue any story without deadlines or expectations. But this unstructured abundance can quickly become paralyzing. Too many options, too few boundaries, and too much space often result in creative block rather than breakthrough. Faced with endless possibilities, the mind doesn't soar, it freezes. This phenomenon is connected to a psychological concept known as choice overload. Just as people struggle to make decisions when confronted with too many options, creators can struggle to focus, commit, or begin when there are no constraints to narrow the path. Structure, paradoxically, helps creativity by providing focus, setting boundaries, and creating challenges that the mind seeks to solve. Take, for example, poetic forms like the sonnet or haiku. These highly structured formats seem restrictive, yet they have inspired centuries of artistic expression. Similarly, filmmakers working with limited budgets often produce more inventive, resourceful work than those with unlimited resources. In software development, tight constraints often lead to elegant, efficient code. Across disciplines, creativity flourishes not in the absence of limitation, but because of it. There is also a deeper layer to the creativity paradox. Creativity requires both freedom and discipline, chaos and order, intuition and technique. Too much control stifles the unexpected, too much looseness dissipates energy. The most creative minds are not those who resist structure altogether, but those who learn how to play within it, bend it, or even reimagine it. Moreover, creative work often requires not just spontaneous inspiration, but persistence, failure, and iteration. Waiting for the perfect idea or ideal moment can leave creators stuck in inertia. But showing up consistently, writing a page a day, sketching for an hour, brainstorming under deadline, often leads to unexpected brilliance. Creativity is not only a flash of genius, it's a product of commitment, habit, and work. This paradox is also emotional. People often feel they need to be in a perfect state of mind to create, relaxed, inspired, confident. But some of the best art emerges from struggle, boredom, or tension. Ironically, trying too hard to be creative can block the very spontaneity that creativity demands. Letting go of perfection, embracing imperfection, and surrendering to the process often unlock deeper, more authentic expression. Ultimately, the creativity paradox teaches that creativity is not about total freedom, but about the dynamic tension between freedom and form. It's in working with what we have, whether limits, rules, flaws, or obstacles, that innovation and beauty are born. Far from being a spark that appears only in ideal conditions, creativity is a resilient, adaptable force that often shines brightest under pressure. The effort paradox. The effort paradox is the counterintuitive truth that the harder we try to achieve certain outcomes, such as happiness, creativity, confidence, or even sleep, the more elusive those outcomes often become. It suggests that in some areas of life, trying too hard can actually work against us, and that effort, when misapplied, may hinder rather than help progress. At first glance, this seems to contradict everything we are taught. Effort is generally seen as the key to success. Work harder, and you'll go farther. And in many domains, studying for exams, building a business, training for a sport, this is absolutely true. But the paradox emerges when effort is applied to things that depend not solely on force, but on presence, flow, and trust. In these areas, striving can interfere with the very state of mind needed to succeed. Take sleep, for example. The more desperately someone tries to fall asleep, the more frustrated and anxious they become, making sleep even more difficult. Sleep happens when we let go, not when we force it. Similarly, happiness cannot be directly pursued like a trophy, it arises as a byproduct of meaningful action, connection, or presence. The harder one focuses on being happy, the more they tend to notice their unhappiness. In the realm of creativity, the paradox is equally clear. When we try to force inspiration, by sitting down and demanding a brilliant idea, we often find ourselves blocked. Creativity tends to flourish not under pressure, but in moments of play, rest, or open-ended exploration. Likewise, confidence cannot be willed into existence through sheer effort. It grows from experience, preparation, and gradual exposure, not from forcing oneself to feel confident on command. The effort paradox also reveals a deeper psychological truth. effort can signal to the mind that something is difficult, unnatural, or uncertain. When we overexert or overthink, we send ourselves the message that success is far away, which can increase anxiety and reduce performance. This is why athletes often speak of being in the zone or entering a state of flow, where performance is highest not because they're trying harder, but because they're completely immersed and unself-conscious. This paradox is echoed in Eastern philosophies, especially Taoism, which emphasizes the principle of wu wei, effortless action, or flowing with the natural order rather than struggling against it. The idea is not to avoid effort altogether, but to apply it wisely, in alignment with circumstances, and to know when to act and when to yield. That said, the effort paradox is not a call for laziness or passivity. It's about understanding that not all effort is equal. Some goals require persistence and grit, others require surrender, patience, or subtlety. Mastery involves knowing when to push forward and when to ease off. Just as tightening your grip too much can cause you to drop something delicate, applying excessive force in the wrong way can undermine your goals. In the end, the effort paradox teaches us that success, growth, and well-being aren't always achieved by doing more, they often come from doing differently. Sometimes, the most effective effort is letting go of effort itself. Compassion fatigue paradox. The compassion fatigue paradox unfolds in the complex terrain where care and exhaustion meet. It reveals a troubling irony: those who care the most, who feel the deepest empathy, who dedicate themselves to easing the suffering of others, are often the very ones most vulnerable to emotional depletion, numbness, and burnout. The same sensitivity that draws a person to help can, over time, become the source of their fatigue. This paradox lives in the quiet contradiction that the more compassion one gives, the harder it can become to feel it. Compassion fatigue is not a lack of compassion, it is its slow erosion under the weight of too much suffering. It is the nurse who no longer feels the same urgency in the face of pain after too many long shifts. The social worker who feels detached from the stories of trauma she once met with tears. The humanitarian who finds themselves going through the motions, unable to connect to the suffering they are trying to relieve. They began with open hearts, but the constant exposure to pain has worn their emotional skin thin. What was once empathy becomes defense, numbness, or guilt. This is the paradox: compassion, when overextended without renewal, can lead to emotional shutdown. And yet, without compassion, the work loses meaning, and the person feels even more lost. It's not that caring too much is the problem, but that caring without boundaries, rest, or support can backfire. In trying to be present for others, we risk abandoning ourselves. The paradox doesn't arise from weakness, but from humanity. We are not limitless beings; our capacity to feel, to witness, to give, needs replenishment. But in many care-driven roles, whether in healthcare, counseling, activism, or simply being a constant emotional support for loved ones, there is an unspoken pressure to always be available, always be strong, always be kind. The idea that one could grow tired of compassion feels like a betrayal of the very values that brought them to that place. And so, many keep going, offering more of themselves while feeling less inside. But compassion fatigue is not the absence of care, it is often a symptom of caring too deeply for too long without enough rest, perspective, or community. The paradox lies in the solution: to remain compassionate, one must sometimes step back from compassion. To keep feeling for others, one must first feel for oneself. Rest, boundaries, and self-compassion are not indulgences, they are survival strategies. Only by acknowledging our limits can we continue to give in meaningful and sustainable ways. The compassion fatigue paradox ultimately invites a rethinking of what it means to care. It teaches that true compassion includes the self. That burnout is not a personal failure, but a signal that something needs to change. That we are not machines dispensing empathy, but people who must feel in order to function, and must pause in order to feel. In the end, this paradox is not a warning against compassion, it is a plea to treat it as something sacred, something to be protected and nourished. Because when compassion is sustained, it can heal. But when it is depleted, it becomes something hollow, even harmful. The paradox urges us not to harden, but to care smarter, more wisely, more gently, with others, yes, but also with ourselves. Modernity Paradox. The modernity paradox unfolds in the tension between unprecedented human advancement and a deep, often quiet sense of disconnection. As societies become more technologically sophisticated, globally interconnected, and materially comfortable, many individuals report feeling more isolated, anxious, and unsure of their place in the world. This paradox is not a rejection of progress, but a reflection of its unintended consequences, an observation that the more we build for convenience, control, and speed, the more we sometimes lose touch with meaning, belonging, and stillness. Modernity is marked by great achievements, medicine that extends life, machines that ease labor, networks that connect minds across continents in milliseconds. We live with comforts and possibilities that past generations could scarcely imagine. But along with these gifts comes a curious emptiness. In a world where survival is less of a daily concern for many, existential questions take its place. What am I here for? What truly matters? These questions, once answered by tradition, religion, or tight-knit community, now often go unspoken or unanswered in the blur of a hyper-individualistic, productivity-obsessed culture. One part of the paradox lies in time. Modern life promises to save it, through automation, optimization, and speed, but often delivers the opposite. We move faster but feel more rushed. We are more efficient but never finished. Technology grants us constant access to work, to information, to each other, and yet this very access becomes overwhelming. The lines between public and private, work and rest, self and role, blur. In gaining everything at our fingertips, we risk losing ourselves. Another layer of the paradox is choice. Modernity offers unparalleled freedom, of identity, lifestyle, belief, and expression. But that very freedom can become a burden. With so many paths, so many voices, so many standards of success, individuals may feel paralyzed or perpetually unsatisfied. When everything is possible, nothing feels certain. We are told we can become anything, but not how to know what we want to be. The weight of self-creation can be as heavy as any external rule. Then there is the paradox of connection. We are more linked than ever before, yet loneliness is often described as a defining feature of our time. Social media connects us across vast distances, but it can also foster shallow interactions, comparison, and alienation. Communities built around place or shared tradition have frayed, and in their place are digital networks that often lack the depth and accountability of real, lived relationships. In this new kind of society, one can be seen constantly but still feel profoundly unseen. Even progress itself carries contradiction. Each solution breeds new problems. Cars bring mobility but also congestion and climate crisis, antibiotics save lives but fuel resistance, connectivity empowers but also surveils. The modern world is a tangle of unintended consequences, where complexity begets complexity, and where we are often reacting faster than we can reflect. Yet the modernity paradox is not a lament for a lost past, it is a call to reclaim what progress should serve. It is a reminder that while we have learned how to change the world, we must also remember to ask why. It suggests that the tools of modernity, technology, innovation, freedom, are not ends in themselves, but means to support deeper human values, connection, purpose, wonder, care. To live well in the modern age, then, is to hold the paradox without letting it collapse into cynicism or blind optimism. It is to be awake to both the gifts and the costs of the world we've made. It is to seek new forms of balance, not by turning back the clock, but by moving forward with wisdom. Modernity can liberate, but only if we stay grounded. It can enlighten, but only if we continue to ask what light is for. And it can connect, but only if we also remember how to be still, how to listen, and how to truly see each other through the noise.